Thank you everyone for coming. We do not have creative work like forward version live. So, alright, for you that part of the good area, the solutions. But yeah, so I'm really excited to be here with Annie and Mare to learn why we're back. One of the things I wanted to start with is I was going to start with your bios, but I feel like you might just try to get into a conversation, so you're going to start. This is an installation shot of Bishkek Vessel's work by Albagli. This installation that I walked into in May of 2021 at the request of Frank and Development. The reason that I bring this up is this exhibition, or this installation, was something that I had come to, met Annie, spoke about the work, and asked her what were the kinds of questions that she was asking, what she was thinking about. And I think one of the reasons we are here today is because a lot of things that came up in that conversation, and that came up in conversation later when I worked at the CJ with Mare in the curatorial department, is that in both of their practices, there are notions of time, notions of being held, of holding, so known as vessels, and rocks. So the connection between me and the two people sitting here is partially through this studio visit that happened a year and a half before we brought this piece to the Contemporary Jewish Museum that Mane helped install, helped Annie with the rocks, and we were together to put the piece up in our own kind of space with our letters dictee. And so this is kind of just the grounding of where I wanted to start. There's a lot there, the whole Bay Area, just how we're trying to help and then, and move forward. So we'll get started with some of the works that we've been talking about together. I think I had mentioned before, there's this very real connection between materials and they just holding, whether it's physically holding material, putting space, holding narrative, giving story. I wanted to ask both of you how you engage materials, if you engage materials in a way that in a way that makes you imagine a connection with your viewer. Also known as how do your materials come to you, become connecting with viewer to each of your work.
Sure. I usually tend to think about materials first when I have an idea or if I'm working with concept. It kind of just comes naturally as I'm diving more into what I'm reading or the things that I'm looking at, and it kind of all comes out also from experimenting. So sometimes I'll have an idea and be like, oh, this would be a good idea to work in metal, and then I do some experiments and then I realize that metal is not needed to that. So it comes from a lot of these pieces, but I wouldn't say that the start material if I talked about materials like the TV. And it kind of comes after once I'm like really involved in the project, then I start asking why this material that's making sense in a moment, but that comes from like trial and failures and just like trying different things. And sometimes like certain materials do have some sort of nature to it that say more either could centrally just like more line with a project or just the way to work the material kind of reflects the concept that I'm working with.
And before we go over to Annie's, I want to have you describe the pieces that we're looking at. So I'll let you describe that. So it's like you second great. It actually has a mic. You talk a little bit about, like, for example, in these pieces, where the thousands process is, right?
Yeah. So our assess is rocks. Yeah. And geology, just in general. Just as the timeline of geology, it's such different than the timeline of humans, and it's very grounding to kind of think about nature evolving over a really, really long time, and our lives being just like this expand and on Earth. And it feels like while we go through a lot of things in our tiny little lives, the world goes at a really, really slow pace, and it's just like something that blows my mind, and at the same time that's just very comforting. So in this thing of like looking at rocks, I try to kind of use the natural timeline to kind of ground the human, at the humanity at least into that nature. And so, for example, here I did not carve rocks. These are ceramics. But I use ceramic, which is a natural medium, having from liquor, to create this sort of blue-line rocks. And then let it kind of put negatives of images of people that I don't know. So these are found negatives in order to kind of ground this like human experience in a bigger background, basically. Sunny says. And I'll ask the chair to talk a bit about a sauce. Sure, good sauce. So that I saw someone say that my name and no other name also says the mouth. Sorry.
So yeah, so this work, Cleavy for Bezels, started when I was a resident on the Headlands Center for the Arts, and if you guys have been to the Headlands, you've probably seen all of the military infrastructure that like is in every place of our landscape, and it starts to make you wonder, you know, how much control, you know, the U.S. military colonization has had over that landscape, you know, which it can shift it. So you can like super obsessed with just walking through there, finding all of this concrete. And the funny thing about concrete at the Headlands is that so much of it is mixed with the aggregate and the beaches. So there's like a landscape that's mixed into this military infrastructure that's there. And sort of as like my portal into like trying to think about that infrastructure differently, I started to research the Franciscan complex and like what has happened there over really from like years. And so
What was in the Franciscan?
that's like that whole area, like, you know,
I know the
ocean eating.
the rubber characteristics. I was.
And yeah, so I don't ever start with a fixed point in mind. It's like this evolving process, similar to what you're describing. And so like the more I would research, you know, how the Franciscan complex evolved and how that impacted the military infrastructure and the concrete there, the more it became this portal into kind of seeing all of that concrete really differently. So I was super obsessed with Radiolarian shirt, and I was there. You can see when you walk there that all those ribbons and escal side of the way the rocks form, and also the salt which comes out from deep inside the earth into the flows in the water, forms beautiful flow shapes. And Radiolarian shirt is formed from little radiolarians. Let's almost imagine those Rizasawa sculptures and those knitted sculptures that are super, super small. Like they're so musical, and they fall from the bottom of the ocean, and then over millions of years they become rocks. And so just thinking about this soft, gooey past and trying to listen back to this like really hard object that's like trying to keep our, you know, keep things out, keep our distance on things. And so this like soft and hard was like important to bring into the work. Gray, a lot of the rocks that are here are like fronds of the Franciscan complex. This is Philosophy basalt, like it's my favorite rock that I can. And then also all the curtains there are printed on silk. And silk is this funny thing where it's kind of like the same material carries you, it's like your nails and your hair and your skin, like this barrier kind of, right? And it's kind of hard. And to me, that was an interesting material to even use in this constellation of this installation.
Yeah. Thank you.
I wanted to move into similar to the way that it sounds like you all place a kind of story or narrative, or kind of like you were mentioning about it, putting humanity or a human scale, lies it in a longer timeline or at the time of rocks to larger than humans. And the same with you, Annie, talking about the way if you think about what the Sam's made up at the Headlands to then be going into a cement hut to make a bunker and talking about how the human stories and civilization / colonization affects natural landscapes, some others times like clash. I think there's on many levels this idea of clashing ideas of time that you're interested in and that you're inquiring about, that you were that falls in line with place, right? So there's this like non-linear book that you're doing in your work where things fall in time or things fall in space, and I want to talk a little bit about that. If you could let everyone, not individual. Yeah, just how time and space, your understanding of it, how that goes into the work a little more specifically. You obviously both just mentioned it a little bit right now, but by bringing up these pieces, as you talk a little bit about time.
Oh, yeah, I feel like time in general, it's kind of the spread that is all my work, and it's different experiences of time and like how we can not only experience them but also see them physically, with things changing in nature, or a candle burning down, or a clock ticking. So I think that in a lot of my work, and also like the negatives, these are found in videos, and it's obviously a picture of a long time. So there's this idea of like different times kind of existing at the same moment, but being experienced in different ways. And so for example, in this work, Let's Go Last Time, I kind of wanted to really look at this idea of like the slowness of time, especially that considering like in this variability and a very like fast-paced society, like the candle is about this object that brings us to a slower pace in a way. And there's a lot of other things that too, but the candle breathings, and I don't know, it is like a big deep dive of candles used as clock in certain areas of the world, and there's like candle class, and I think that this work kind of was trying to do that, and the light also kind of being the thing that helped kind of see the image. So the image was about you seeing all the other time. So it's like all these experiences of time and how to like experience that with everybody still do makes Hogwarts kind of. Basically, I'm making work because I want to be keeping up, but this is weird. And we're all living in at the same time. So yeah, but it's like the thread, my work, and I think it just comes across differently from work to work.
Yeah, for you need another backup vessels, but I feel like there's some more time and Drive to talk about. Specifically, I feel like you mentioned in a few of your pieces, you discuss how rocks hold time from different places, and might have opened up with that as well. And there's also water, but I think he also has been some area engaged with. And when you're thinking about, like, this can't be extrapolated, right? Time and water and space, like these are all could be signals of each other, and key or expressed or prescribed by each other, both in like historical research or even just like moment. Like, so I don't know. Did you have any maps you wanted to share about time and vessels, or not? Move on. I don't know if there's anything. I did something that I never do, and I shared my questions with my conies before. And I was like, don't get kind of full of questions. I'm probably gonna like just talk. And now they have essays, and now I want to make sure that you feel like you're sharing what you want to share before we move on to my like totally casual next question. That I wasn't gonna have you study.
And think that's like for time. I guess the only other thing I'll add about time is that in here in this video, I blow a ram's horn several times, and that I think is like a way of connecting to time and like ancestors who have performed that same function. It was also like a marker of time. Yeah, so it's the only other thing that I would add.
Edible ransom nuptials love.
These are a few more pieces that discuss Somali-based time. Can you talk a little bit about this work, Annie? That in case has a different idea of time passing, but also one of the things that I think is really engaging about both of your work is so you spoke to us many times that in close overall, you worked completely different, but as in your engagement with it and your inspiration is completely different. It would possibly take you a minute to know that you guys were totally obsessed with rocks, water, and like it would take a minute, and I'm fascinated by that. And so, in this most recent work, or more recent work, can you talk a little bit about how those ideas that have also run us through what's into praxis came up in Lucy
So specifically that, or like
anything you want on that was like girl.
Okay, so what we're looking at is that, so you guys go to the David Ireland house. So there's a huge dining room table there. It's made out of 2 floorboards. Like, it's inconceivable how those floorboards even arrived inside the room. Like, it's hard to understand the spatial dynamics of it. And so this is a series of limestone files that are adhered together as the 7 phases of Dylan carved into it. And during the course of the exhibition, there is a performance with like 30 volunteers where we sing the song about water, and then we poured 209 ounces of breast milk into the table. And then 500 Capp Street was really, really brave, and they let that table sit out for the entire duration of the exhibition and let all of the breast milk evaporate. You don't think Evan would do that. So there's this like very immediate thing of time, right, where something is evolving in, over the course of the exhibition, and went from being this like milky thing to being this thing of like landscape and skin, and like has these different properties suddenly.
Which the walls on the eye of the house say, it's true. The collations, like there's something, yeah, that felt.
That's true. And but I, in Maybe Home Vessels, I was thinking a lot about time located in the landscape and kind of trying to search for it with like some kind of X-ray vision through rocks. And with this work, I feel like I turned more inward into the body, tried to locate time in the body. And I became really obsessed with this idea of hypersea. And it's like an idea that Rachel Carson was writing about in the 50s, where as we evolved and started to like come onto land, we had to figure out how to take the nourishment of the sea with us. So like plants, they have sap circulating through their bodies, and humans have blood circulating through their bodies. And I kind of took this one step further and thought about, if breast milk is processed blood, it steals all your nutrients, becomes nutritional for the baby, then there's this like really long arc of time in our bodies, in the body of the mother, right? That it starts with the Paleozoic seas, and then all of a sudden, like you're in the present moment feeding this child as the future. And so like I was thinking about time in the body.
That? It's time.
I feel like that was the manifestation of it.
It's like candle clock, breast milk, same.
We had a conversation about this work. It was really interesting because I had no idea about like breast milk being this like filtration of your blood, and I told Aya, it's like, wait, but that's kind of like how rocks are being formed too. And she was like, they were just like looking at each other like, oh my god, this is so crazy.
I was like, why do I have this need to put milk with rocks together? Why? Like you find out after it, and yeah, I don't know, because also Wolfgang Leitch had this work of like putting milk with marble, and then on top of it they know where to pour milk onto marble. I mean, they're not mothers, but you know, still like there's something about bringing those two materials together.
I also want to say that when we were installing your work at CGM, what I would discuss with Lada, the conversations I have with Fanny at Pursuio, and I would mention things like that, like she mentioned this author and you should read her the ideas of you should, and then Lottie would be like, oh my god, I'm gonna go, like this is so amazing, but I didn't know, like this is exactly what those months of installation like sounded like it looks funny, which I think is just us, but again, to this little ecosystem we're in. I want to move to ideas of gender. I think there's some very clear ones that we can discuss, but also idea of, again, narrative and stories, like things that are embedded in objects and visual representations, and the way that your work is either fighting those days, embracing it as they, enveloping them as something of your own making, something that becomes something that that exists when someone engages it. No, it's not a support, but when someone comes upon your work and that experience something that makes it right, the narratives that you come to know society, and then whatever you can happy to verse. So gender, stories, narratives. Question?
Yeah. For this specific body of work, I think that gender obviously comes to the Kurt's thing is like very feminine object that like throughout time, society, we kind of like had to inherit as a woman, harder to hold our belongings because we don't have to pocket. We have so much breast milk to carry But I think that beyond, at least for this work, beyond this, the feminine object and the gender, obviously like the gender is of the object. I think like the persons in general are just kind of this extension of oneself and our identity, because if I were to look at all like your persons, there's obviously no one who has the same thing in it, and it kind of describes who you are, unless you're a man and you just have your wallet in your pocket. But yeah, I think like gender was kind of like this natural thing that came to be while I was making the purses, and also something that I was thinking a lot about when creating this work is about the Bayous, which is a native tribe in Colombia that I have ties through my family, and one of the big things that they do is ochidas, which is like native purses that they crochet them with patterns, and each pattern has a history to it. And I should have pictures for that. And it's mostly made by women. So the women are the ones that crochet those bags. That it was history, and they just were in them everywhere. And they're 5-8 bags also. So yeah, and they. Yeah, what was the second question?
That was what I wanted to kind of touch on, is also this historical, cultural background, because I think there's also, like I said, there's the immediate, right? It will be the versus society, those women's versus gender. It's an immediate section. but there's also a play on the way that the idea of labor and working is something that's associated to men, but the idea of like small labor, right? Spreading materials, fabric, carrying what we call whole days to work with women, right? Working is the work of men. Like there's something that I think with when gender comes up in the description of an exhibition about purses, it's almost misnomer in terms of what it's relating to. And I think that you mentioning your cultural background is one example of that. Just how fickle those definitions really are. It's really in of my question. Any counter was the rep. Back here. Annie, you also have a way of engaging certain ideas and identities like gender or the role of certain people in a family unit or historically. If you want to talk a little bit about what the ceiling of this piece means and the theme I'm related to is current installation.
Yeah, so I think that the zillion is actually also about time too, even though there's a lot of the phase of the lives up.
Yeah, where to start? So I became like really obsessed also with the cosmos and like thinking about the break of the cosmos and for this work. And there's this Greek myth that Hera was eating Hercules and he ate the hair nipple and her breast milk sprayed across the sky and it created the Milky Way. And you know, that's not the only narrative around the birth of the Milky Way. And so I ended up layering like hundreds of images, mostly of Isis feeding her son, kind of like morphing into Mary Fide Jesus, and layering them in the night sky. And there are really, a lot of them are so ridiculous because the boobs are coming out of the neck, the armpit, but there is always this gesture that is the same, that feels so consistent around like how a mother holds her breast or holds her child. And to me, that is like an incredible way of connecting to time also, both time with the cosmos, like, and also the thought is like, we're eating the cosmos that we're born, or like that's what we're consuming.
Do to
No, it was just flying
Offender, yeah.
It's funny that the Scientologists, like, that was like coming back to labor, that was like the labor of the woman to kind of create it all pieces. Oh, just interesting.
Create it all in various topics. But yeah. And then also like with this table, in that same book, the sea around us where each person is thinking about flood of the sea, she's also saying that her idea of how the moon was created was that these huge solar tides were moving the earth, catch part of the earth as part of it, like kind of ripped off from the keys of the moon. So I liked this idea of one celestial body becoming another. And I was reading this book, Matrescence, and she's just talking about a lot of things relating to Community Mother, but in it she just has a chapter on the moon and how it like came into being. And I don't know, maybe part of it is just, you know, being a new mother and like thinking about these ideas that end up being shared as a new mother. Just
Yeah, no, I think that this was something that I had a lot of fun with just even in the slideshow because I was so engaged with the ideas that were going back and forth. I haven't seen either show. Like I saw Maya's show today and I never got to see this show at that studio, but the conversations that I've had with both of them in the years that I know them and then just leading up to this, it's so exciting to discuss how these Strange Mantis was in a layered wallpaper ceiling and purses because again it just really speaks to the kind of clarity of vision that you had in trying to get a story or a narrative to a point of connection. I mean, you both have said that I don't necessarily think that early on as to like what the person's gonna encounter will encounter to the piece. But this is just a testament to like there's some kind of clarity whether you know you have it or not about what it is that the pieces can be, so that there is this connection to be all the way different metrics. And we're kind of getting to get the slides, but I had a couple other questions that I wanted to ask about. I guess the can see the last one. See how specifics. Okay. One of the things that I was very interested in learning more about is you mentioned that you had the studio visits together. Do you have a question or some kind of starting point that you'd like to give the other one based on those studio visits? Something that came up that you'd like to share or you'd like to chip in about would give the person that I think vendors will might be on it.
Yeah. So I was like, the food stuff so many times that I was super fascinated, but with you, you're trying to think about the newer and you're placing these images within the rocks or the purses that are of people not connected to you in any way. And so like you're encountering that image in the same way potentially that the viewer would encounters them. But inevitably, like you're working in your studio, you're developing a relationship with these images, and I'm sure you're developing narratives for these images or something. So inevitably, and they're kind of, maybe we start together, but then we sort of, there's a divide. And I'm just so curious, like if you can share a little bit more insights into like even one person there, or maybe you have, like what your experience working with that image was like.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for me, it feels really nice to be working as sponges, just because I get to, as the audience, get to experience these images for the first time, kind of, and then I just have like these questions about the people that are after the images, and also something that really weirds me out, coming from like my mom used to be a photographer, so like I grew up around photography a lot. I just, when I found these images, I found them at
I forget the names. Scrap. Yeah, thank you. Spent a lot of time there.
when I find these images at Scrap, there's massive things of it, and for me it's just like, who just goes and throw their family images out in the wild? And like there are pictures of babies, there's pictures of people in their bedrooms, and like there's all these different types of scenarios, and I just like it makes me feel so weird because I feel like I would never do that. And if I were, like when I die, burn them, like, or cut around in my family. But I don't want a stranger to see my images. So it creeps me out. Yeah, burn them. But so I feel like so I guess it is really nice because when, as an artist, when you make work, most of the time you're in making these pieces and you're projecting all of your concepts and ideas and background, culture and all that. And like, it's that tiny little moment when I feel like I'm seeing that the audience, like I capture these images. But yes, to answer your question, there is a split moment where I've spent so much as images that they're hanging all around the studio. I can see them. Every piece, I go back to these walls of images I have and repeat the images I talked to the boss with that one specific piece. So I do create, not necessarily create narratives behind them, but I definitely become more acquainted with them, and like I know so well, and I know where the image of the mother holding the baby is going to be on that wall. So I think like that's like the difference for me, experience. Yeah.
So thought about it, or like you should then that's very creating a full like narrative or
Yeah, and like I also kind of create collages with them. So like in these pieces, these are very different images coming from different families. You can really see that it's not same people in the images. But I also sometimes like to put that being like sort of like I group them into like what's going on. So there's a lot of pictures of mothers holding babies. There's a lot of pictures of people sitting at a table with dining. So it becomes this kind of sort of fairness of collections of lives and people, but they are all kind of doing the same things. Like they're all documenting the same parts of their lives. And I see that through the pictures I take to my friends or my family and gatherings and all that. So it's like the universality of it kind of, yeah.
That you seem comfortable to make it creates like a kind of comfort with them because they like know what it means to out there to do that. It also sounds interesting because it sounds like you're describing an ecosystem within your studio that leads your work, which I think is really something I didn't know before. Connect. I feel like in some ways, Annie, your work pulls from places outside and then you break into a body of work. And it just sounds really, you seem on it for you to talk about how it's more about the comfort level, the story that he created, the works with beasts, the work around in front of you. Not that Chiopos also do the opposite, but yeah, that's fascinating to me. And Amy, I had a question on a similar note, this idea of like intimacy and very personal moments. I had a question because we didn't really touch on this piece, but is there, talking about was like breast milk and body nipples, it all seems very personal versus found images of someone else in the world. The opposite of that, I would imagine, is like your own breast milk in peace, right? Or your own body on the street while you're growing a baby. Those are different ends of a spectrum of universality. You can connect both of those images or objects in different ways. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to have such personal and intimate ideas, that images, that objects in your work? Has that ever been tension? Has it ever been like happen? Yeah.
I don't know. I think that I process my experiences through my work, which I know not every artist does, but I do. And in this video work, when I was asked 7 months pregnant, I went to Egypt, that's where my family is from, and I tried to locate where they were from. Like where I was asking this question, like where do I begin? And I kind of felt like I was just like reaching out to grab something, and the thing that I was trying to reach was just like where we let it, and I couldn't touch it. And that was like really disappointing. And I think that space of between is where the universal comes in, because then it became a bigger question of like, okay, where do we begin? And then we start to enter this space of like origin stories in that bigger scale. So I think that it always begins for me with personal, even if it's just a walk in the Headlands, right? Like that's a really personal experience, but it inevitably leads to this larger question.
And I didn't read your bios, but one that I'm very interested in sharing is I think it's a big part of the connection that I felt with you both in learning about you and your work. If you feel comfortable sharing a little bit about where you're from, where your family's from, like what kind of histories you bring into your work, what kind of histories you bring, and what are some of the questions they're asking you when it does come to you and your own identity face the world. It is very specific. That's
Well, I would say that, like I'm a daughter of a refugee and a family who immigrated to the U.S. and I think that creates this really ungrounding experience for me personally. And I think that is a way of trying to reach out into a landscape to understand where I am, because I feel like the world is spinning and my feet are sort of above it. And so like, what's the tether that I kind of hold? So I was just about it. It's like 4 days breath for being like a work grounds me in my place. And what's happening now, I was thinking about the body too, grounding me in my body and finding landscapes and people through the body.
I haven't. What was the question? I'm sorry.
I just wanted to give the audience a little bit more context of where you come from. Not necessarily like what are you, but what are you? It's come up in your work in the discussion a little bit on it.
Yeah. I'm librarian. I've been in here 6 years, and I think my family history just like touches on a lot of different places, so sometimes it just feels very overwhelming. And I think like the work just helps kind of like ground ideas from kind of each branch of that history, where our Colombians and my dad is not only Colombian, but he's half black, half native, indigenous from Colombia. So those are two different cultures already coming together. And then my mom was born in France, but from like a Jewish mom and Canadian Irish dad. And so there's just like a lot of mixing in there. And I think it's really nice to be able to go to those cultures and kind of those histories and study them and their understanding what their values and art and how that applies to like the moment and the things that are alive in life. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed a lot of schools of thought on like, do you need to know the artist backgrounds, but I'm interested in their work. This is not to say you should be interested in their work because of these stories, but in this particular conversation, I think it's important because it's just about a connection and understanding where people are in the world and where they're finding their point of gravity. YouTube as humans are places where I find around my writing and the ways of prevention. It's I feel like this is just a good time to share like different ties that we discuss where you are also showing affection through your practice, through your research, through discussing with family and whatever language you were talking that day, particularly wanted, I don't know, for Rowan's or wherever it's French, 7 issues, like who knows. And so those kinds of things where I'm like, oh, this is all part of living in the world in this body, this rate, this mode. So I have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to questions, because I told them that I gave them a surprise question. The surprise question is, what is something that you are excited about working on, getting started with, doing, eating, milking? I love this like gun mom and the gross milk.
No more milk. No more milk. We're done.
But in our studio visit, I think we both saw that we were really interested in water and wells right now.
We're just like, well,
Water. That's the next thing.
yeah, I feel like I'm still recovering from this show and other shows that I got this year. So I'm like slowly getting back in the studio, and then Theo is color from. That's trying really hard to get back to the studio. And yeah, when I am that kind of studio visit, we kind of once again funny enough we're like, oh yeah, I'm interested in like with water. I don't know if we came so specific thing about like water time together, but I think like from the conversation I come that was the word of the concepts over there. So yeah, I'm just like thinking about wells as this like vessel holding the water and like the different like the at least for me thinking about water as this material going through things and like it's present in are like different states in the planet, and it for me feels like the blood of the planet kind of like transforming from one state to another and like going through rocks and like how bad sticks the rock that
why are living underneath here? And it's kind of like at least you made the well because it's like place where like everybody comes together to experience that and more. So I try to
Yes, I see where that was. And I'm staying in class in January and not to do class, so I'm a couple no trees and
What's your words?
Yeah, I see. I mean, I'm really interested in locating time in water and it's the behind like also the behind right now. And I just was thinking about.
He won't look the same.
Okay, well, thank you both. But I think I'm gonna open it up to questions. I'm not sure how should they come up. If you will just get.
I have a mic I can pass around.
No, so you can. Are there any questions?
This is Marty.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy and Ryan, for kind of explaining more and contextualizing your process, and especially how you're thinking about material. And it has me do all sorts of different things, but I think like the photographer in me and the photo historian in me is wondering how you think about the use of images, and Mareiwa, this is more directed towards you as like how negatives and like physical images are showing up in your work. And I'm wondering if you see that material as different from rocks, or is it like of the same kind of material language as the rocks that you're thinking about?
I think there are different versions of it. I think like the objects in itself, obviously like material, when you touch it is very different, but in a way they kind of do the same thing for me, where when you take a photograph, your physics rotate, and when you see a raw, this is certain amount of time that was frozen and like took this one specific shape. So yeah, they're like there are different versions of like
Crystallizing time nuts, or what that we decide why we're crystallizing, and because it's sort of like the negative specifically has very ghostly nature to it, and the rock doesn't necessarily have that, but definitely crystallize a certain area in time, right? And they also have this quality of like, the more time passes, the more the images kind of get erased. Obviously, in the negative, like the more time passes, the negative fibers with a bit of like pigments and like what makes it the image to stick there. And for rocks, they're being eroded, so they have a lot of similarities. Like when you think about it, so they feel very connected that way.
But yeah, I'm sorry if we talked about some theorems that I wasn't curious of. If we did, please skip it. I'm curious to what extent you both embrace sugars in the collection of your work.
I think that, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a lot of chance for so many people, like for 500 happen for myself. I did test it first. I did not test it for like the duration of the exhibition, but I did a lot of tests of like the amount of
crystal.
the amount of breast milk and how it would evolve. But definitely some things happened at my country castle that I was not expecting. And I was just really excited about it. It was like, also, you know, they also like treat the shows, so like,
I think it will depend on the material sometimes too. I need that working certain materials like metal as a like when you come in to work with style, you have to have a very specific plan. I was like, but here for me, and I think wood a little bit too, because our materials compared to like ceramics, there are materials that if you get it wrong, then you kind of have to start again. So there is less room for chance. But in ceramics, you have absolutely no fault. You can make something, you can break at any point, and if like things can also work in the kiln, and that has happened that once I was a piece, the piece works so much that the glass can go in and flush. So I'm like, well, we gotta start again. But I mean, where I view the chance is when I'm experimenting. Like when I'm doing little tests of things, that's when I'm like, oh, okay, this one works better than that one, or that this chemical works better than the other. Like that's when I think like the chance comes more, and that once you grasp that, then you are like able to move on to like, okay, let's do runs now.
You know, it's so nice at one way.
I'm really curious how both of you found inspiration in wells, appearing as a very specific water source. Go to soil pond and they're discovering inspection from water. So, yeah. For me, wells kind of came from thinking about washing, and like this idea of washing. Just in general as humans and the dream world kind of, but I didn't want the concept to be so vague. That's like, what is an object? What is something that we tend to turn ourselves when we're pushing for something, or that I was tossing the coin, or there's like little rituals that we do sometimes in order to like push for something. And the well felt more like a community driven, like a wells and fountains kind of felt like this big object for what people can come together, and there is like people from all around the world with different backgrounds, and like sort of maybe washing for the same day. That's how I keep think about wells and fountains.
And I think I kind of like my studio set up where I just write a lot of memoirs all over it. And I always get really excited when one project gives you this momentum into like the next one. And so right now I've been thinking a lot about butter in the body and trying to map that a little bit, and thinking about like the story of Miriam, who always provided water to her community and through the well. So I was just thinking about this relationship. Yeah.
For the sanity, you know, for people at all.
Yeah.
I had the question to pursue Mareiwa, but for its both perspectives, I really like this concept of the purse as an extension of personal identity, and it tracks for me. I think that women on the whole in the United States have richer people personalities than obviously, regardless of how you view that in the States, I was curious about Hawaii culture too. You mentioned that so it's the women making mochilas in Hawaii culture. Do men carrying mochilas? And also, like on that question, how do you think about gender identity, the richness thereof, from and in other culture?
So I've only come to like really learn about the Hawaii culture through the past few years doing a lot of research. It is mostly patriarchal, so the women are kind of at the head of the families, which is super cool. And yes, usually the women are the ones making the purses, and that's how they kind of also share their histories on that family. So they're divided in clans, and every clan kind of comes up with their own imagery that they embed in the mochila. So that's kind of like how they communicate things from like a generation to another generation. And there are certain imagery that are very common to all clans. It's very rich culture. But mostly when women are the ones creating these purses, and men do wear those purses. And they usually wear a lot of them. Like it's not only necessarily one, especially if they travel, they'll wear multiples at one time. Also, one very common way to wear that is that they have a really long strap, and the strap goes over their head, so their bodies look like we're on the shoulders. I lost track of your question. But yeah, I feel like in the way I've been like looking at courses and like specifically like in the culture and like also just like in the general like gender area, what the word is, but the femininity of it, like the weaving, the creation of it, it's very interesting. But it's also interesting because like in Hawaii culture, like women are the ones making the mochilas, but men are also drawn to weave and in a different way. So it's kind of like, okay, the labor is kind of divided, but it's also the things that they weave are usually the things that go on the horses and before you put the on. So it's like a different type of like. Have you guys seen question? Go back, scene two. There's a lot. There's a really, really cool movie. I always go back to that movie because it's very beautiful. It's called. I read it. Sorry. I'll remember. Sorry. I'll remember. Shall I pick for this at about time as there's plans more? And there's one short question anywhere or? Well, thank you. I just had the title inspired. It's called Birds of Passage. Yeah, it's so good. Alice. Birds of Passage.
Birds of Passage. Birds of Passage.
Pájaros de verano. Pájaros de verano. It's very cute. So, in Spanish, it's like the birds of summer. So it didn't translate quite well. Yeah. Thank you.